March 27th, 2025, and I'd like to call the meeting to order. To start things off with, at noon today, I'd like since there's some new members here, I'd like for everyone to go around the room, starting with Jen, and introduce yourself.
I am Jen Murphy for SMD 2.
Jatan Geezy, SMD. I live in 5. I'm not sure if that's what I'm listed under.
Yeah.
Roger Horton.
Morgan Chegwin, I'm your staff liaison, and I fill the statutorily required role of daily oversight of the shelter.
Chrysanthemum Cohen.
I'm Penny Roberts.
I'm Dr. Karen Fremgen.
Well, thank you all. This is my first full meeting as chairman, so I'm sort of working off a cheat sheet, so be patient. So issues or items that are not on the agenda may be raised by the public at this time. Citizens should speak from the podium, address all comments to the and begin stating their name and address of single-member district number and limit remarks to less than 3 minutes. Do we have anybody signed up for public comment? I see no one here. So I'll now entertain a motion to approve the consent agenda as published.
I'll make that motion.
I object.
Your objection is noted, and how so?
I would like to remove B and C from the consent agenda, please.
So you would make a motion to approve consent agenda for items A only?
Correct.
Okay.
Yes.
So we would just need a second for that.
Okay, need a second?
As
To
amended,
approve
I'll
item
second it
A.
as amended.
Well, you made the motion, so we'll need a second.
Yeah.
For your motion.
To approve item A only.
I'll second that motion to approve item A.
You made the motion
All
to
right, I'll
approve
make the
item A.
motion.
Anyone? Jayton, was that a?
I'll second it.
Okay, thank you. So the consent agenda, item A has been approved, and B and C is now open for discussion.
All right, so for January 2025, we had 187 animals come into the facility. During that month, 154 left by either adoption or rescue transfer. 33 were redeemed by owner. Only 2 were wildlife released. We're still in those heavy months of winter during this time period, so not a lot of activity with our wild animals there. With 27 animals deceased, that yielded an 87.5% live release rate. So these winter months, we do see a higher live release rate because we have fewer wildlife getting injured, getting hit by car, and we have fewer kittens coming in. So we do traditionally see some of our best performance in that November, December, January timeframe, and that's what you're seeing there with the 87.5% of animals released alive. To further drill down into the 27 animals that died, and this would be euthanized by certified staff or died in custody. 5 of those were cats and 21 were dogs. And another way to break that down to help tell that story is 18 of the animals euthanized were due to aggression. So the vast majority of those dogs that were euthanized were due to aggression, and 9 were due to illness or injury beyond treatment. So we have a well-rounded process to assess those animals for treatment, and we do excuse me, we did treat a number of animals successfully to health, but 9 were beyond anything that we could offer for them. For field services for January, we had 451 cases worked by animal services officers. 288 was some kind of stray response, animal at large. 62 were enforcements and rechecks, so some other violation besides dog at large. 32 were wildlife relocation. You may notice that we only released 2 wildlife alive, but we had 32 such cases. Some of that is dead animal wildlife picked up, and some of that is, this month we didn't have it, but it would include any injured wildlife beyond rehab that would be euthanized. So that's why there's still, 36 cases of wildlife relocation, but most of those were deceased animals, unfortunately. We had 34 bite investigations, so that's decreased from the prior month. We had 32 transports, so that's a variety of like meeting owners at their home to put their animal into quarantine, meeting owners at their home to have their pet go to the veterinarian for whatever care if they had trouble with that transport. It's also like dropping sick or injured animals off at a vet for review, so it's just some kind of, case management around some bigger issue. Excuse me. And then 3 cases were just labeled as like owner released seized intake. So it's not uncommon that we get a call, for example, for a cruelly treated animal. We make contact and they simply don't want the animals anymore, or they're suffering some reason why they can't care for their animals anymore. And we would just go ahead and approve that in the field to impound that as part of a case. So that contributed to some of the intake, and that is your month of January.
Morgan, can I ask a question? On that last item where it says owner released and seized intake, what does the first part of that phrase mean, owner released?
So owner released would be a voluntary action by the pet's owner to allow us to impound it, and they relinquish any claim to that animal. Seized intake would be part of a court order where we had a mandate to impound the animal.
Did we have any seized intake?
I can get that breakdown of those 3 animals of how much of that was owner released and how much of that was seized intake.
Thank you.
And Morgan, when it says 32 transports, that is not talking about possibly Jen's association transporting to another location or finding other owners. Is that correct? That's
Right, that's just animal control transporting animals to and from places.
Local.
Okay, thank you. I thought that, but I wanted to make sure. Thank you.
And we don't need any action on that item. It's just a, general discussion if you wanted to move on to February.
Exactly, yes.
So if you want to read that agenda item.
Let's move on to item C, a consent agenda, the February performance report.
So for the month of February, we had a bit of an increase in new arrivals, 204 animals coming into the facility. Excuse me, 137 were either adopted or rescue transferred. That's where you'll see the animals leaving as an outcome to another organization. We have 45 animals redeemed by owner, so a bit of an increase there. Only 1 animal wildlife released, 46 were deceased, so a good bit of an increase there, unfortunately. And that live release rate ended at 79.91%. So we did have poorer performance in February as far as life-saving, but that is coming into, we'll talk a bit more about this, but that does start the beginnings of like skunk season and seeing animals, behaving strangely and getting exposed to certain things, and does bring us out of that kind of winter slow that we normally see in November, December, January. So that is contributing to the live release rate decreasing there. So again, the vast majority of the animals that either died in custody or were euthanized were dogs. That's 35 dogs euthanized. 34 of those were for aggression. And 12 of our animals were euthanized because they were sick or injured. So that is all of our intake and outcomes. For our field services cases, you see a slight decrease there with 381 total cases. 246 were a stray response. So, of course, the bulk of the work that they're doing enforcement on is that type of call. They had 51 enforcements and rechecks, 25 wildlife relocations, 47 bite investigations, so an increase there, and just 12 transports of moving animals just locally wherever they needed to be, and no animals surrendered or seized as part of a case.
I have a question. Out of those that are rechecks, since they're not bite and they're not bite enforcement or stray, again, what are those?
So it could be a spay-neuter follow-up, it could be a secure enclosure follow-up, it could be dangerous dog follow-up. It's just any other violation besides dog at large. It could be multi-pet, any other complaint we're getting.
So is anyone interested in entertaining a motion that we have the monthly shelter performance reports become part of the regular agenda on a regular basis?
I'll make that motion.
I hear second.
I'll second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Motion carries. With the discussion on items B and C and A being part of the consent agenda, we need a motion to accept the consent agenda as B and C were read and A is accepted.
Since we approved the consent agenda, we can move into the regular agenda item.
We
B
did
and B and C don't need any action.
Okay, good. So moving forward to the regular agenda. The discussion and possible action of animal services dog intake policies, presentation made by Interim Director of Neighborhood and Family Services, Morgan Chedwin.
So we wanted to update y'all on recent action around our dog intake policies. We had a discussion with the City Council in December that y'all are aware of, and a lot of this is sourced from that presentation, but just so that you have the latest updates on what our dog intake policies are. That just starting from a broad spectrum, of course, we impound cats and dogs, but as we've discussed in prior months' activity, that we impound wildlife, livestock, fowl, really just any kind of animal issue going on in town. And in general, animals arrive by three methods: animal services officer intake, found stray, and owner surrender. So when an animal services officer is impounding an animal, even before this policy change, they were picking up any dog or livestock or fowl that can be caught. So if there are dogs that we cannot catch through traditional means or through chemical capture and we're leaving a trap, then we're continuing to work that case to fruition. But in general, they walk up to a dog, they slip a leash, and they impound that animal through traditional means. Of course, any debilitatingly sick or injured cats, dogs, livestock, fowl, and wildlife. Cats and wildlife are allowed to free roam, but to the extent that they're injured or sick, we would go ahead and impound them at that time. Any kind of trapped wildlife, so anything that's a high risk for rabies, which we'll have a definition on that shortly, is if you trap that, we pick it up at no charge. So your skunks, your raccoons. If you trap anything else, like cats, possums, there is a $25 fee to pick that up simply because they're not contributing to public harm. And so ASOs are the ones that handle that. And then any deceased animals. If they're in the right-of-way, they're free. If they're wildlife, they're free. If it's on private property and it's a domestic animal, there's a $25 charge to pick that up. And that can run the gamut from, hey, my neighbor's cat passed away and is in my front yard, or my own dog passed away, can you come pick it up? That can be a variety of things. But that's the kind of intake that happens around the field services arm. Excuse me. And so that's unchanged since the policy change from February. The found stray, we did have a major change in, and so we, of course, were accepting sick or injured animals of any age or species from private citizens, no problem. Any trapped cats or low-risk wildlife, if somebody traps a possum, they can bring it to us, no problem. Any kittens over 8 weeks of age, we really encourage that if they're younger than that, we try to workshop it and say, what's going on at the property of origin and try to work through, because if they're under 8 weeks of age, people think they're doing the right thing, getting it to help, and the shelter is not a safe place for such vulnerable neonates. And then previously, any healthy or nice dogs were taken in if we were under capacity, but that's no longer. We opened up for free found stray intake regardless of capacity on February 26th. So that is a big change. That Good Sam is still a good program that, if you're savvy enough that you found a dog, you chased it down, you had an hour in your day to come by the shelter, we'll offer our Good Samaritan if you can hold on to that animal for a couple days while vaccines take effect and we try to find the owner. And that's still available as an option, but it is no longer a requirement when we're approaching capacity. So that is a big change we had there. And then the final method that animals come in as part of owner surrender, that we had a major change on this as well in February, that we previously referred to rehoming services through Concho Valley Paws. And so any owner would have to complete that counseling process before they could be considered for a shelter intake, and that's no longer required. That is optional. And so all dog surrenders are accepted. There's been no change to our intake policies around cats or other species, livestock, wildlife. These changes are specific to dog surrenders.
Morgan, was that changed because I would assume that people just didn't want to go through the process and they would let their dog be a stray at that point and just let them out in the community?
We have some anecdotal evidence of people doing that they're moving and their new place won't take them, and they need a solution, right now, today. But it's a thing that's hard to track, right? We don't have data on it, but I certainly have situations where, we show up for a dog at large, it's hanging out in front of this one property, we find out the last water customer, and he's like, oh yeah, I called y'all and y'all didn't take my dog, so I just left it behind. So some of it is that, and so I think the intention behind this policy change is to decrease the number of dogs at large, and get them impounded for whatever outcome.
If they're not in their moving van heading out of town, do y'all still refer them over to PAWS for that counseling?
No, we know the counseling is still available as an option, but no owner surrenders are required to go through that process any longer. You would be fully accepted for any reason to owner surrender your dog.
Are they told about it, though?
Yeah, they're still
Okay,
given the option. We do have resources through Concho Valley Paws. Would you like to participate? It's a really good program that serves a lot of animals. I think 500 animals a year are served through that process, where they're either they find a solution to be retained in the home or are placed directly from their home of origin to the new adopter. So we do still share that program, that it's available, but it's no longer required to have your pet surrendered at the shelter.
So do y'all ask any questions
Oh, yes, oh,
Oh,
absolutely.
okay, okay.
But there's no, so we try to workshop it, and we'll say, well, I don't want my male husky anymore because he keeps escaping. Well, have you neutered him? Have you researched some fencing that's appropriate for such a breed? But we don't have a lot of, there's been a lot of additional volume. And so to the extent staff has the availability to kind of get to the root issue, we're happy to do that. We have that expertise, but we, in general, can't keep up with workload to really get to the root issue of it all.
Jen, has PAWS made any changes or adaptations in their policies or practices to adapt to this?
We are pretty much just trying to find homes for whatever comes in, but we get a lot of calls about people for wanting us to take their dogs, and we put them through our rehoming programs. I mean, they either want to go through them or they don't. I don't think it's been long enough since the policy became in effect to have any relatable data to it, though, to how many are participating and how many are not.
But there's still the potential through the animal services policy for that dog, if it's surrendered directly to animal services, that you guys would come and review and look at it and see if it is a candidate for adoption, correct?
Yeah, we look at as many dogs as we can, but yeah, no, they come in and they're currently getting the same opportunity as the stray dogs to be rehomed.
So it's basically more protection for the dog, because if the owner doesn't want to go through it, there's the possibility, which I've seen, people just leave their dog and move, versus if they could take it, animal services could get it, you guys would still have the ability, and part of your mission is to go over there and review the population over there.
And try to find them homes, yeah. As of right now, I don't, unless the owner has surrendered it for aggression. Everybody that's been owner surrendered has been put up for adoption and given the same opportunity.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, and it hasn't been much time for data, but we have about 4 weeks of information that our intake since this policy change has been about 155 dogs, 36 of which were owner surrenders, and our outcomes have exceeded that at 175 dogs, 94 of which were transferred to Concho Valley PAWS for placement. So I'm trying to get, it's hard because it was mid-month, midweek that we made the policy change, so I don't have apples to compare to prior year, but that is higher volume than we normally see for this time of year. But that's kind of the additional animals, that's just dog data for what we've been handling since the February 26th change. One thing that, again, just to close the loop on we recognize that we were in a situation in San Angelo where we had too many loose dogs. And we'll talk about this more in the upcoming agenda item about barriers, but we recognize that there was a policy need. Our previous practice to close intake to finders of pets was not an industry standard, was not recommended by best practices. It was simply, a shelter in crisis with the resources that we had. That's what was implemented. But so we think that until we also address these other issues, it's just going to continue to be a problem. And so we'll delve more into that into the next agenda item, but removing these barriers around like coordinating intake and trying to get to the root issue has placed additional pressure on adoptions. I think Concho Valley PAWS pulled something like 70 animals in like 2 business days right after this policy was placed, because San Angeloans did show up for animals and did have that intention, but when we're moving so much faster through the system, we have concerns about, missing an illness. An animal came in asymptomatic, gets stressed in the shelter, starts to show signs. Well, I've already filled up my isolation room 2 times and it's in the general kennels, and then it's potentially spreading. And so we're trying to work through those other issues of having appropriate isolation for the additional intake, PAWS being confident that the animals they're pulling are, appropriate. And so we're working through all of this, as well as supporting the team, that there have been additional euthanasias, has been an increase in euthanasia, and so they're getting support services as well. One thing that we had recommended to the city council when we discussed this in December was one big hangup that we find creates friction with any kind of interaction with a citizen is the definition of owner. That someone will say, well, I found this dog, I need to bring it in, and I'll say, well, when did you find it? Well, maybe the city ordinance says it's your dog if you've been caring for it for 3 days. And I think that we've all seen circumstances where that doesn't make sense. Like on the 4th day, it's not your dog, right? But there needs to be some kind of common sense rule, and the ordinance can be whatever it needs to be. The city council adopts that. That's locally mandated. But we also get the folks that say, well, I found this dog, y'all need to take it in. I've had it 5 months. I've had it 2 years. And so there does need to be some education around, when you start feeding it, when you take it in, it is your pet, it is your responsibility, and that means you do need to comply with local regulations. You need to spay neuter it, you need to keep it secure at a minimum, right? And so I think, we had recommended stated to the council that there could be some further discussion around the definition of owner, and I don't know if that's something the task force is reviewing, but it's pretty standard across Texas that it is 3 days, but we could be, more accommodating and say, well, it's 5 days, or it's 2 weeks, or it's, whatever. And so that's one item that could be additionally addressed there. Also, the fee schedule, when somebody's coming to redeem their pet, it can become problematic because of the fees. If somebody's wanting to microchip their pet, we'll again talk in a moment about, if you live in a target neighborhood, I would love to offer you a free microchip all day, every day. Because if I know where the pet belongs and I can bring it back to this address, this household, and find out, why did it get out? Why is it running loose? What is the root issue? Instead of just impounding it and hoping for the best, that is something that could be addressed through the fee schedule of offering that service for free. And one thing is, you see the vast majority of our calls and our cases in any given month is due to responding to stray animals, but that does include stray livestock. And so we've talked in the past that it's in state code that it is not this agency's responsibility to handle stray livestock. And although it's not a frequent call, it's maybe a couple times a month. When there is an stray livestock, it's at least 2 people, probably all of our staff of field services out responding to such a call. Because if it's one goat, you and I could catch one goat. But when it's 40 cows, it's all of our folks, and I'm not responding to any other calls then. I'm not responding to dogs at large. I might cut somebody loose to go to dog at a school, but just it is a drain and does take away from our ability to do what I believe is our core mission. So those are 3 things that we had said. In addition to changing dog intake policies, what are some other things we could do to really work with citizens?
I'd like to go back to definition of owner just for a point of clarification. And that is that if a person is possession of an animal for 3 days and that animal is chipped, and the owner hasn't been contacted or found yet, the person who has been in possession of that animal for 3 days does not actually own the dog. It's the person who's on the chip. Is that correct?
Sure. I think that's fair. In my 8 years in this role, I've never experienced that, though.
I just
Yeah, but we would. So, for example, even if a pet comes in as owner surrendered, if it's microchipped to somebody else, we still contact that original owner. Hey, did you know your dog wound up at the shelter? So, we would explore all options around ownership, including the microchipped owner versus the 3-day, 4-day owner.
I just wanted to make that a point of clarification because of the potential controversy that could bubble up from something like that.
And the trouble is, if somebody found a pet and it was microchipped and they just decided to keep it and didn't contact us, we can't police that. I don't know. So
absolutely.
So you could wind up with my microchipped dog and I really miss my dog, but I don't know where it is. So At that point, if you've had it for 4 days, is it your dog? I don't know. If you tried to get that microchip in your name, it would be tough. But it does get messy and become a civil issue for owners to work through on that end. But
I have another little point of clarification too, is that we all realize that you and the organization have done a great thing by targeting neighborhoods, because you know where the problems are based on the calls that you receive. But I would just want to probably make a comment or a statement to the fact that targeting neighborhoods are not exclusively the issue. I can tell you that in some of the more affluent neighborhoods in San Angelo, dogs are turned out every morning for their bathroom breaks or whatever. They're walked off leash, and the reason I know that is because I see it every day. So we as much as for efficiency and getting the most bang for the buck, so to speak, for any changes we make or any improvements we try to make to our process, we have to remember that the culture of the community is such that the problem is consistent throughout the entire town.
certainly, and any ordinance we adopted would be equally applied across the entire city limits.
Who's going to make the recommendation as to the length of time of ownership?
This group could, or could direct staff to research what, I am waiting, I know that the task force is reviewing ordinances and making recommendations on changes to ordinances, so I don't know if they're going to review this one specifically. So if y'all wanted to review that specific ordinance, you could direct staff to do research and say, depending on what the task force comes up with, we would also like to explore what is an appropriate time frame, and we could bring it back to you as a future agenda item.
I would like to recommend that.
Certainly.
And I don't want to step on the task force toes, because I know they're working hard, and I'm not really sure what all their suggestions are going to be. I'm not sure they know yet. But certainly the 72 hours ownership is you find the dog on Friday, and by Monday it belongs to you, and you're obligated for all of the medical and the vet and the containment and everything else, when you might have just been trying to be a good Samaritan. So I don't think 72 hours is a reasonable time frame, but I don't think 6 months is either. So yeah, I would like to have some information on that, and didn't know if we had the ability to make a recommendation, but based on whoever's going to have to go do that research, Kathleen, that we'd like to have some options put before us to help out the community and help out y'all also.
Certainly. And we'll look at what some other communities are doing, pull some sample language and run it by Kathleen and her group, and we can bring it back to y'all. And if the task force has already done that work and we don't need to duplicate it, then we can defer to them as well. So
Okay.
we'll leave it kind of open-ended, but definitely flag it as something we want to explore.
Thank you.
Absolutely.
I don't. Yeah, go ahead.
Sorry, you mentioned that staff might need additional support now that the euthanasias are probably going to continue to increase due to these intake changes. And we know that that could lead to more compassion fatigue, more burnout, more everything. And then you mentioned some turnover. Do you feel like y'all are equipped and have the capacity to provide those extra supportive services for mental health and things like that?
I don't know if any employer is ever fully equipped, so that's a good question. One thing we did, and we're still in the early days of it, of figuring it out, and so one thing we did early on was connected with our local law enforcement support system that they have in place for their team as well. And so the animal services officers have been granted full access to the police chaplain team, the police psychiatrist, and we also have, of course, mental health services through our health insurance, and can stand up like an employee assistance situation where they actually like bring a counselor out or offer counseling. And so the team knows that that's available to them as well. And as the supervisors will continue checking in and making sure everybody has what they need to the best that we can. I also think it's something that can, like you're fine, and when you, but there does come a point that you hit that wall and you were like, I am no longer fine
That's
with
why I
this.
asked, because, of course, it's not going to probably present immediately, but these are real things to consider.
It's a
I guess I
concern.
just wanted to ask,
Yeah.
just to bring it up. in
We've built a
case-
team of
yeah.
professionals that were full speed ahead on serving San Angeloans and serving citizens, and they knew that euthanasia and getting certified and having to perform that was part of their job. But there had been, a decade of data to show like it's about this level. And so to look at that change is something that current staff will have to assess as part of their continued employment.
Okay, thank you.
I have a question. When somebody does find a dog and they're not considered owners, and they've taken it to have it scanned and there's no chip, at what point, like if they were to keep it longer than 3 days, if we lengthen that time for ownership, do they send in a picture so that y'all can put it on your website as lost? Because if people are going, I don't think it's anything to have a dog 10 days trying to find its home.
Sure, and we would just encourage them to connect with us on Good Samaritan the first 3 days, and then, we'll grab a picture, we'll put it on our social media looking for owner, we'll connect them with resources, scan it for a microchip, vaccinate it, we'll do all the things.
Okay.
So someone who's interested in and willing to and able to, and if it comes up on 9-10 days and they're like, look, I'm going out of town this weekend, I need a solution, then sure, bring it on into the shelter.
Okay. Because I don't think 10 days is out of the realm of trying to find to find their home
Sure.
and not be ownership. after
We would
10
just ask that you connect with us either way, even if you come in after the 10 days, you would just sign off on it as an owner surrender and it would be accepted anyway,
Okay,
under this policy.
okay.
Are we ready to move on to item C?
I think so, yeah.
Okay. So you're up again, Morgan.
All right, we'll be discussing barriers to citizens accessing animal services programs. And we took kind of a broad stroke to that. Full transparency, I worked closely with Chrysanthemum on this because we both had a unique perspective to, what's going on with folks that are unable to access animal services, however that is. And so we worked together on this. And so anything that, certainly interrupt me on anything additional you want to add or clarification. But that's kind of the brainchild that came together for this item. And we broke it down really into 3 different components that these barriers to service, I think, manifest in 3 major ways. One of them is simply using government resources at San Angelo Animal Services. And I think that some things that are preventing people from using our resources, and I think those resources can be anything from coming by and getting your pet microchipped to redeeming your pet once it winds up at the shelter, or even adopting. I think that's through Contra Valley Paws, and they have a very good, rapport with the community. But just really anything where you would have to visit the shelter. I think some things that are preventing folks from doing that are, first, just a general distrust of government. If you believe in small government and you think that that government should stay out of your business, then you may not come in because you simply don't want to interact with the government. For any reason. We also serve a clientele that has a lack of reliable transportation. And we're speaking just in volume here, that certainly there are folks that do have reliable transportation, but when we look at the largest volume of calls for service, folks that that we're trying to reach, that are having some kind of animal issue, this is what we're seeing. There also can be I think a significant issue is a language barrier, that certainly we have staff on board that are bilingual English and Spanish speaking. We can get translation services other ways. It's kind of complicated, but if you have a general distrust of government and I put you with my Spanish speaker that is a person with a badge, then we still can't make progress towards resolution on that. And then poor rapport with citizens. Certainly anybody following on social media, they're going to say, well, I don't want to go to San Angelo Animal Services. I don't want to participate. There's a lot of drama there. There's a lot of negative things being stated. And so I do think that contributes to folks not wanting to or unwilling to participate in any kind of our services that we offer. The second major component that I think San Angeloans struggle with is complying with regulations. And so whether that's secure enclosure, like having an appropriate fencing or pen, spay-neuter compliance, rabies vaccine, microchip, multi-pet permit, just whatever it is, there are a ton of folks that are not complying. And when you look at why they're not complying, these are the most common things we're seeing is one, ignorance of local requirements. Certainly, Dr. Fremgen and I cannot imagine a world where somebody doesn't know that their 2-year-old dog should have had at least a couple rabies vaccines by this time, right? That's well established in state law for decades, but some people say it to avoid a ticket. Some people, well, I didn't know about a rabies vaccine. Well, my vet never mentioned a rabies vaccine. Well, are some folks just saying whatever to get us off their back? Maybe, but there are a good many folks that today are legitimately unaware that their pet has to be spay-neutered if they live in city limits, has to be microchipped. They're not in our circles that we see this every day. I can't imagine owning a pet and not wanting those things, but there is an ignorance of what those local requirements are and what they need to do to comply. We would also reference financial and socioeconomic status as a significant reason why people are unable to comply with regulations. We write hundreds of tickets a year for failure to spay neuter specifically, but an individual, that's simply a summons to the court. So they appear at municipal court, they enter their plea, guilty, not guilty, I rehomed the dog, whatever it is, right? And then they say, even if I'm guilty, even if you found me guilty, I have no means. I have no financial ability to A, spay neuter this pet, or B, even pay the fines you would assess me. And there is a provision in the municipal court that they would have to at that point declare them indigent and drop the charges. And so no amount of citations is going to resolve that issue. And you and I might say, well, then they shouldn't have a dog. But what I can tell you is they're just going to get another dog. They love their dog. How do we just connect with them to own a pet responsibly? How do we, I would much rather them keep that pet for the natural life of the pet. So there's not enough spay-neuter programs in this town to reach every single one of the folks that we're citing, that we're referencing. It's just a matter of money. And so I think the financial and socioeconomic part of it is a significant part about, does someone have a 6-foot privacy fence? That's a luxury in this town. And it may not be in your neighborhood, and it may be something you see quite frequently, but in the majority of where we're patrolling, the fencing is a significant issue. And then the last I would just say is a desire for personal property rights, right? That some folks say, well, I'm just not going to neuter my dog. And I'm like, well, I'm just going to issue you a ticket. And they're like, well, I'm just going to plea out every time. So you write me as many tickets as you want, but I'm not going to cut my boy. Like, that's a part of it. I would say it's the minimal part of it. The biggest one, I think, is that financial and socioeconomic issue. And the last major category that I wanted to touch on is that this language around maintaining ownership for their pet's lifetime. So these are things where it's not necessarily a violation. It's not necessarily something where our team interacted with the household. It's simply that living in their own home, they're struggling to keep their pet, and that can be restrictions and fees from property management, a lack of affordable housing, because if you owned your property, you could have a lot more freedom to say, well, I would like 3 75-pound pit bulls. We can do that if you own your own home, but if you're renting or you're in an apartment, it's so restrictive that you would have to look at rehoming probably all of those kinds of pets. Rising costs and availability of pet care. Some studies show that dog food in particular has gone up 40% since 2020. That's crazy. And we've all felt it. When you buy as much dog food as Jen and I and Jatan and we all do, I mean, we see it, but we've absorbed it and we funded it and we have figured it out. But for somebody that's like, do I buy school supplies this month or dog food? That's a tough decision to make. And then just a lack of knowledge on appropriate pet care. And some of that comes to someone shows up at the shelter wanting to surrender their intact, husky, male husky, and we try to get to the root issue, and we're like, well, did you know if you neutered him, it would decrease a lot of this undesirable behavior, and you got to give it time to work. It can take weeks for those hormones to get out of their body. You're not going to neuter him, and the next day he's going to be like, not jumping that fence anymore. I mean, it's a whole animal effect of trying to get to, but some of it is simply that. And unfortunately, by the time when someone's at my front counter with a leash on their husky and they're like, I'm done. I don't care about neuter. I don't care about fencing. I don't care about solutions. I care about not having this dog anymore. And that's tough. That just that lack of knowledge on appropriate pet care and behavior. 70 to 76% of dog bites in America are perpetrated by intact male dogs. And so when we go into bite prevention in April, a nationwide movement, that's a significant part of it. Neuter your male dog. It is best for their health. It gets you compliant with city ordinance, and it decreases bites nationwide. So some of it is that. So
I'm sorry, I wanted to add one
Yes.
thing on this slide. There's also a significant lack of resources that are pet-friendly for domestic violence survivors. And that's another reason that I've seen multiple people surrender their animal or have to rehome it or take drastic measures because they just need to be safe and can't because they have a pet that they value. So.
And I think it's important to note that when our team is serving someone trying to flee domestic violence, they have a general distrust of government. They have a general distrust of a lot of people, and they're not going to be honest with us about that's what's going on. But even if it was, I don't know that I have anything extra that I can offer. And so my greatest hope is that I can keep you with your pet when you're already losing so much, but we don't have a lot of pet-friendly options to offer folks. And so that's a good point. Thank you for that. So we worked through a laundry list of things that could be proposed resources. We just as things to start to explore that until we're serving these populations well and getting them what they need, we're going to continue to be a shelter in crisis. We're going to continue to be a community with a large volume of non-compliant households. So we talked about doing some pet-friendly housing legislation, even if there's just something locally. Excuse me. Even if it's just allergies. I'm not contagious. I'm sorry. Is there something locally that we could do to encourage property management and landlords to allow families to stay together? One thing that is, I have this. Thank you. One thing that is actually at your state legislative level for review, if anybody wants to reach out to our folks, is there is a bill proposed, and we're dipping the toe in some kind of progress towards pet-friendly housing legislation, and it's Bill 410, House Bill number 410, and it is to standardize pet fees for renters. And it is, dear landlords, you cannot charge both a pet deposit upon moving in or starting the lease and an ongoing pet fee on the monthly rent. You can do one or the other, but it's not fair to do both. And so that is at the state level for review. It would take effect this September if it was approved, but it's something that could absolutely be a first step statewide to offer some support. We want to do more, of course, but it would be something to be able to say, look, it's actually against state law now to do, what you're experiencing with your landlord. Let them know, like, that this is prohibited by state law. You've already paid a pet deposit when you moved in. It is no longer lawful for you to continue to pay your pet fee. So that would be huge. Before this was even proposed, we were looking at something local as well. And I have not seen any other community adopt local ordinance around pet-friendly housing. But again, we can look at, what makes sense for San Angelo, what would be a good solution there. We also talked about a home-to-home owner surrender network. So similar to, Concho Valley Paws offers their second chance program. So if somebody's looking to rehome their pet, they would put it up for adoption. Paws would market it. They would handle the adoption. They would do all of those things. But the owner does have responsibilities, I believe, to participate in that program. Their pet has to be spay-neutered, has to be current on vaccines. And so some folks are willing to do that process, but unwilling to do that part of it. And so having like a home-to-home owner surrender network, you could take your German short hair pointer and he's not neutered, and you put him on this portal and someone will drive from New Jersey to get him. I don't see an influx of German short hair pointers at large in our community, but it would be something to be able to offer to people to say, look, you're willing to just, self-support rehoming, but the second chance program doesn't make sense for you. Here's a login to be able to just manage your own profile of your own pet that you're trying to rehome. That's something we've seen be successful in other communities. I talked briefly earlier about offering free microchips to residents of target neighborhoods. We do outreach as we can and as we have funding and as we have donations, but just to have like a line item in the budget that's just every year free microchips if you live and it's a HUD-defined target neighborhood, that would be huge, because then we have the friendly interaction of, let's get your pet microchipped. I'm glad you love your pet. And then we follow up with, hey, I noticed your pet isn't spay-neutered. Concho Valley Paws is having a voucher sale, whatever it may be, and we just continue that relationship to work. We've got to get our foot in the door to have one interaction to then work them through complete compliance ultimately. We talked a bit about community education and the ignorance of these things that folks need to be aware of. We talked about rebuilding trust, webpage accessibility. We are launching a new website in May. Our current website translates, I think, to 23 languages and is ADA compliant. Great. And we're launching a new website in May that will have even more functionality. But even just having the right amount of information on our website, that it can become overwhelming if you have too much information, but you want people to, because a lot of folks are not going to call us. They're going to Google, they're going to search, they're going to read online because they're worried about, judgment or being told no. And so having a lot of information on a website is good for folks that are looking in that way.
Morgan, on the microchipping, I know that in the past, there's been mention that you guys, when someone comes and they adopt some from wherever, that part of that is that they have to go get the dog or animal microchipped, and then they don't follow through.
No, if they're adopted, they leave with a microchip. If they're owner redeemed, they also leave with a microchip. Any animal leaving the building has a microchip.
Okay, how do they get a voucher that they take to a vet?
No, we have the microchips. Our staff
Y'all
implants
do
it and registers it for them.
Okay, thank you, because I thought if you're expecting someone, there's going to be a portion of that group that is not going to follow through.
Yeah,
And
no.
then
The
it uses more
registry.
services to follow up and say, did you guys go get this microchip for this animal? So I
No,
was just trying.
everybody except for infants going into foster leave spayed or neutered, microchipped, and current on rabies vaccines.
Okay,
It's all done before they leave the facility.
The only animals that leave our facility without a microchip are feral cats going back to their originating colony and dogs leaving bite quarantine, and the bite was quite severe. So most dogs leaving bite quarantine, we're still microchipping. We wear our PPE, we secure the dog, we implant a microchip. But if the bite was quite severe and we've not been able to safely handle the animal for that kind of thing, those are the only animals that are leaving our facility without a microchip. And those animals with the bite quarantine, they're leaving and being told, you have to get this microchipped. Ideally, when they take their pet to be spay-neutered and it's sedated and it can be microchipped through their veterinarian, but, and we do that work. I tell everyone when they come by to get a microchip, hardest part is the paperwork. I'll be done with my part of it before you've even signed this form, and we register it for you, and we handle, if you move, if you need to change anything, just contact us, we'll re-register it with the national databases with that updated information. We handle all of that.
Back to the education. When you say, these slides are total barriers to accessing services, are we recommending to the city that they try to fund some of this stuff? Is that what we're looking at trying to collect information for?
Chrysanthemum and I made a laundry list of just everything we thought we needed to start attacking this topic. And we would recommend a subcommittee of this group continue to meet because it's highly nuanced. And I think we start with the smallest, I think we start with the most important things to us in this moment, in this group. We all have different opinions on each of it, so this is the time to weigh in on all of that. But I think the first things that we would want to research is any kind of local legislation about pet-friendly housing. What is that? And then on the other side of that is just partnering with property managers. We can pass a law, but that doesn't necessarily mean it's enforceable. It doesn't necessarily mean it has a lot of compliance. I think we've seen that with spay-neuter, right? We adopted a spay-neuter ordinance in 2014. Still, I think 88% of the animals coming into our facility are unaltered. So making a law does not make change. But if we can partner with property managers and inform them on, look, keeping tenants with their pets means they're happier tenants, and maybe they don't lease it for 6 months, they lease it for 3 years, and the damage that can be caused by a pet in a well-maintained property is minimal. And so I think it has to be both the carrot and the stick, that we're incentivizing and encouraging property managers to have pet-friendly housing, but we're also exploring any local legislation if there's anything we can put in place to require pet-friendly housing. And Kathleen may tell me there's just nothing out there. Like people can run their property how they want. But those are the top two that I think we would start with.
But for somebody to not know that it's an ordinance to you're supposed to have your dog or cat spayed neutered.
I know, it's fascinating, but
I mean,
it's...
put up billboards,
I know.
anything to, I don't know how somebody doesn't
But you didn't
know
put up a
that.
billboard on 19th and Chadburn.
How-
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
We are not, the folks that have unaltered pets, the folks that are causing intake to the animal services are not being reached by the messaging. And it's mind-boggling. But it is what we see.
If anyone wants to join that subcommittee, like, I'm ready to get it started, so happy to.
When you talk about free microchips, I think that putting to the city, recommending the voucher program, Paws has one, Critter Shack has one. Does the city actually sell vouchers?
No, I think the last conversation we had was, let's do some more research and get back together, and I don't think we ever have. So, no, the city does not run a voucher program, does not offer spay-neuter assistance.
Would it help to have more presented to them, or to more strongly recommend they've got to find funding for spay-neuter?
Yeah, I think in our last meeting, we had a few punch list items for you to bring back, and I didn't ever get that follow-up, so I can go back and find those notes.
The only thing I remember is that I was asked to approach the county. I didn't know that you were waiting on any other information. Okay.
That's just my recollection. It's been a minute, but the city does not currently have,
Because I know that
spay-neuter
the
assistance.
rescues do theirs, but the city, I hope that they could find funding to do some sort of, because I don't know about Paws, but Critter Shacks is non-income dependent, it doesn't matter, we'll sell you. And the city, they may want to make that income dependent and manage that. When you talk about the chips being HUD, but something to more strongly get some funding for spay and neuter. You look at all the time and money that's spent rehoming, and that should never stop, not saying that. But when you talk about you sell 200 vouchers in a month, you've prevented 800 animals, possible 800 animals that never have to enter any of this.
I know you have a lot of, a depth of knowledge on this. Do you want to sit on the subcommittee with Chrysanthemum and I?
I will, yeah.
Okay.
I'd like to say, I think one of the pillars of what we're talking about right now is community education. And I don't know if it could be part of your subcommittee or if it should be separate, but I'm of the mindset that we should have some kind of a program for community education that goes beyond social media or digital media. Because a lot of the folks that live in the communities that become target communities, they probably either don't have access to that or don't pay a lot of attention to it.
They probably have it, it's just, it's not an interest.
Yeah.
I think most
And
people have it, it's just,
I think something fundamental is billboards. You know, I mean, and maybe outreach through the school system. I mean,
I've tried that. The school district was not ready for it, is what I was told.
You know,
Certainly, we can use the veterinary hospitals. You know, back before 2014, before that law was passed, everybody got a city tag, and they had to pay for it. And that was through the veterinary hospitals. And the only thing that I ever heard in 2014 was like, oh, we're doing without the city tags, and now we're going to require that every dog get spayed, neutered, microchipped, and rabies vaccine. And that was it. That was the last we heard of it. And, you know, I make sure that everybody that asks about, oh, where's my city tag, or how do I get my pet licensed, I always inform them that this is what has to happen. And I think, you know, the veterinary hospitals are a great place to educate everybody that goes in there, at least, that they can make sure that they're up to code. Because they listen to the veterinarians.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I think it'll be a continued discussion, and we'll continue working on this item and bring it back for further discussion.
I think more education about it freely and more readily available could help build trust. Because I
Absolutely.
know there's a lot that don't trust. Not even just in general, because of all the turmoil and the changes that we've had for animal control in our city. I think that there's confusion, and when you're confused, you're not just going to go offer your information. Well, my dog's not compliant. What do I do? It's just making sure that the education is there. And then the education for spay and neuter, maybe we can proceed back to possible, low or no kill. But until the education's there, that can't happen.
with the topics we're discussing today, I think we should consider increasing the frequency of meetings.
I watched the video when the discussion of more meetings, and even if there's not a lot to discuss, I think the frequency, I went back, and I've come to some of these meetings, but I've also went back through August of 24, I think it was, and that was the last update for the shelter changes and improvements. Bob said it was going to be started in a month. And this isn't on the agenda, but I'd like an update on that too.
Yeah, I was getting ready to say, could we put, I don't know, future agenda or follow-up, or however you want to put it. I'd like to know, the council passed some money or did some things, and we're supposed to be moving all these animals over to that building on Paint Rock Road while they expand the availability of kennels and other things at the shelter. When is that going to happen? Can we have an update on that?
Yeah,
And-
it's, because it's not an expansion, but yeah, I'll get y'all some information.
Okay, I thought it was an
Updates
expansion.
and
I thought we were
improvements.
gonna get more space or nicer or better or something out there. And the other thing is, poor Jen, you wear two hats. You're not only a member of this because you've been appointed, but you're also the representative statutorily here. Could we have a report from you at the meetings as what's going on with PAWS and what's going on out there?
I won't be giving the report, but the executive director, Jenny Wilson, can. She just couldn't make it to today's.
Okay, well, I know, I thought we talked about it, but you know, it's been a while and I'm,
Yeah,
but
no,
if we
she-
could get a report from PAWS, at our meetings, I think that kind of helps us up to date when the community asks us things. We can talk about, you know, what Morgan has presented to us, but I can't really address what you guys are doing or the numbers or the successes, because that's what people want to hear. They want to hear the good things and the successes and things that are going well, and not, oh my God, we've got to adopt 9 dogs or they're going to be euthanized on Saturday. So if we could have, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
That's what gets the most media coverage, and Facebook blows up and Bentwood neighborhood blows up, and you know, everybody's screaming because these dogs are going to be euthanized. And I think if we could hear the positive things from your organization, because they are the statutorily designated one for this board, it would be very helpful.
Sure, I'll get with her and we'll figure out something.
I thank you.
And if she if we do go to monthly, you know, even if it's every other month, but the point being brought up by Victor was that there wasn't enough to discuss. And it's not that there's not a bunch of, or an hour's worth of stuff, it's the frequency and getting updated is, I think, important.
I agree with you.
And I think, and, you know, y'all talk, but even if they're shorter, you know, if they're 15 minutes long, and I know we've got several here, if 1 or 2 miss, then we can proceed, but getting updated monthly. And the other thing is, especially if it was quarterly, you go to have a meeting, and there was a meeting we came, there's a lot of people was upset, and they wanted to talk, couldn't make quorum, never rescheduled. That is a problem. And if we're going monthly and we miss one, then it's not quite as big a deal. You know, if we can't make quorum monthly, if we miss one, that's not as big a deal as if you miss one quarterly and it's not ever rescheduled. That's
Well,
a problem.
I think what we have to do to move forward today, though, is we have to, correct me if I'm wrong, we have to propose an agenda item that would increase meeting frequency, because we're off our agenda for today.
We could, since there was minuted action for the 2025 schedule, I think bylaws allow for, and I'm trying to be careful because we're way off agenda and I don't want to be in violation, but a chairperson can call a meeting as well. And so I think you've heard the
Thank you.
need, and you can take that action, you know, offline, just, you know, direct me to do that. Because I think that would be the best way to do that.
Well, can't we be addressing this under number 5 as follow-up and administrative issues? So
Yeah, that's what I was
for the
gonna say.
next meeting, we could put it on the agenda. I mean, that's what I'm asking.
Well, yeah, so we've skipped item C at this point, and so I don't know if that's what, because where we are in the agenda is the final regular agenda item. And so if we're going to postpone that, because we are after 1 o'clock and I want to be respectful of everybody's time. So if we want to postpone that till April and direct chairperson to call an April meeting, you can give that direction and follow up at administrative. It's the continued discussion that makes me a little uncomfortable, but I'll defer to Kathleen on what she's comfortable with. I think we've heard you, and we have a mechanism for that.
So I believe that this topic of discussion does fall under the last item on the agenda, discussion and possible action, on follow-up and administrative issues. And so we can further this discussion before we end, if you'd like, and discuss the next meeting time and re-acknowledge the item agendas that we were discussing, the proposal to discuss those future agenda items. So if I may, if you want to continue on with the discussion and possible action on state and local requirements for rabies control, and then we can revisit this discussion, which it was on the agenda in regards to administrative issues. We can just revisit that at the end and wrap it up from there if you all agree.
Okay, well, let's proceed then to the agenda item C.
And I would just want to get a consensus. Does anybody need to leave because we're
I do.
out of time? Yeah.
I'll just excuse myself, but yes. Okay. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you for letting us know, and just to acknowledge for anyone that might be participating online that we do still have a quorum. Thank you.
Okay, just so to continue our discussion about our requirements under state and local law, and we're delving into rabies control. We included State Health Code 822 regulation of animals because it is primarily about rabies control. Most of what your San Angelo Animal Services does under rabies control is defined under the administrative code, actually, in 169A, and then there's a bit of that in local ordinance as well. So in regulations for animals in the state health code, which I think that these parts of it are pretty common sense items. I'm not going to read all the definitions. It does apply to San Angelo. We're not exempt from this policy, so that gets us through those first few sections. I did want to spend time talking about this is a really important component that we refer to and lean on a lot is seizure of a dog causing death of or serious bodily injury to a person. And so this is under rabies control and bite control. So this is supporting the double tenets of health and safety, which is why I included it here. So first, if such an incident happened where a dog caused death or serious bodily injury, the court shall issue a court order, and that's through our staff making application to the court for a court order, that we're presenting the complaint, the evidence to the court and asking for that to happen. And so we would impound the dog and hold it until the court determines disposition of the animal. So the court has to set a hearing within 10 days. Both the complainant and the owner are notified of that hearing date. They're served the warrant. We provide that return to the municipal court. And then either of those parties and the state may present any evidence of what happened in this event that caused the impound of the animal. And then the state set forth some pretty clear language about how the court can proceed. And so if the dog caused a person's death, they shall order that dog destroyed. There are some exemptions we'll get to in a minute, but by and large, if a dog caused a person's death, the court shall order that animal destroyed. The court may order the animal destroyed if the dog caused serious bodily injury. And in the definitions, I think there's a pretty common sense definition of what serious bodily injury is. And it's an injury that a reasonable person would seek medical care for and would likely cause hospitalization, I believe are the two components there. Not the hospitalization?
I believe that
Sorry to
it's,
put you just gave me a look that I was like, there's several sections that govern that, so that might be in a different part of the law.
it indicates in chapter 822, 822.001, serious bodily injury means an injury characterized by severe bite wounds or severe ripping and tearing of muscle that would cause a reasonably prudent person to seek treatment from a medical professional and would require hospitalization without regard to whether the person actually sought treatment. sought medical treatment.
Yes. Thank you for that. It also states that the court shall return the dog if it did not cause death or serious injury. So if evidence presented at the hearing refutes what was originally collected and what was discussed, then we shall return the dog to its owner. It also goes on to say that it shall not destroy the dog if it was secured and protecting its property, if the victim was trespassing and was over 8 years of age, if the dog is a police service animal, doing his job as a police service animal, if the dog was defending the person from assault and the assault was being perpetrated by the bite victim, and if the dog was secure and reasonably prudent to not allow a person under 8 years of age in the enclosure, but the person under 8 years of age did make it into the enclosure and was bitten. That's a complicated one. But in general, if the dog was doing its job, that would be a defense to present at the hearing. If the dog is ordered destroyed, that destruction, that euthanasia must be performed by a veterinarian or trained staff is how the state words that. Animal Services does have euthanasia certified staff that perform such procedures. It also states that it discusses attack by a dog, and it states that the owner has an offense if they fail to secure their dog, and it makes, and this gets into the dangerous dog declaration in just a moment, but what we're looking for, if something's gonna be declared dangerous, we are looking for, was it an unprovoked attack on a person off its property causing serious bodily injury, that definition that we just went through. So if it meets those 4 criteria, then that animal can be declared dangerous and enter that process. So there are some defenses here, and I think we spoke a bit to the, it's kind of referenced in the part where the court shall not order destruction if. So it states that it's defendable if the person handling the dog, the person owning the dog was a veterinarian, a vet clinic employee, a peace officer, which was where we normally see this play out, an animal shelter employee, or a state employee. Also, any TDCJ employee who is training dogs, a trainer of a guard dog company, a person with a disability who uses the animal for assistance, and that is very clearly defined in the law that the animal has been through a formal training process, and the person who is disabled has also been through a formal training process on how to handle that animal. So it's a true service animal. Also, if the dog was participating in search and rescue, if the dog was participating in a dog show, hunting activity, ranching activity, farming activity. Also, if the dog was on leash or under immediate control of the owner. So most of these are quite rare, and that's not really what we see. What we normally see is it was a peace officer, law enforcement dog that was supporting law enforcement efforts and perhaps bit somebody, and it might have been quote unquote unprovoked off its enclosure, but the dog was doing what it is trained to do in its line of duty. So the others, quite frankly, I've never seen used as defenses, but is in state law. The state generously gives us permission to adopt local regulations around dogs, and of course we have done that, and I think we've talked about that at length even today. The state gets into talking about dogs and coyotes. I do just want to clarify that city ordinance prohibits owning coyotes as a pet, or even coy dog hybrids as a pet. So a lot of this, I'm just going to say dogs, because if you have a coyote in city limits, we're going to have a bigger conversation. 822 does require owners to keep their dog under their control, and it provides for a $100 fine. Well, I guess that's fine if you live in a community that hasn't adopted this ordinance, or if you live out in the county. But for city ordinance, we have a dog at large prohibition that yields a larger fine and runs through the municipal court process. So when a dog is at large, we do not cite under this section. It is a less it's a lesser level of enforcement. We use the local ordinance because it's a higher level of enforcement and a higher fine. Okay, so dogs that attack animals. So here's an interesting component that I think maybe we all thought died out in the Wild West. But if a dog is attacking, about to attack, or has recently attacked domestic animals, so your other pets, livestock, fowl, any animal that's domestic that you're keeping, it may be killed by any witness. So it could be the owner of the cows. It could be just anyone who sees this happening could say that needs to stop happening, so I'm going to kill that dog. And under this law, the person who killed that dog would not be liable for any damages. They would sure have to be able to prove that this happened. And of course, discharging a firearm in city limits is against the law in other sections of the ordinance. And so this is not a common thing we see, but it is allowed under state law. The person may also detain the dog and return to the owner or call animal control. That is more frequently what we see. So a person who owns sheep calls me and is like, hey, these two huskies, they have attacked my sheep, it's a problem. So we come out, we impound the dog, we contact owner, all of those things. And in state law, it says that the owner is liable for all costs. So any of the impound fees, any property loss incurred by the owner of the livestock or other dog, whoever they were attacking, and at that point the owner shall control the animal, and it states the owner shall control the animal in accordance with what the animal control authority dictates. And so we do have a secure enclosure ordinance that is clearly defined of what is required, and we provide that document, and we do inspect that secure enclosure and make sure that they are compliant with that. So this gets into more of the dangerous dog section that we do unfortunately rely on a lot. So it's those 4 points I made earlier, that the dog makes an unprovoked attack on a human victim outside of its enclosure, causing serious bodily injury. So if it does any of those 4 things, me as the animal control authority, I can declare the dog dangerous. Does not have to go through a court hearing. I provide a letter on letterhead, and ideally we are notifying the owner of that dog when it's coming off its quarantine. And so we're handing it to them and mailing it to them, because from the time they receive it, which is hard to measure if I just drop it in the mail, right? So ideally we're handing it to them. Within 30 days, they need to register the dog, secure the dog. We're going to inspect that secure enclosure. They have to carry $100,000 liability insurance coverage, and they have to comply with all local regulations. So their pet needs to be spay-neutered. It needs to be rabies vaccinated. It needs all of those things, if not done yet. The individual, and it's later in the ordinance, but I want to mention it now, that if I declare your dog dangerous, in 30 days you have to do these things, but you can appeal it. In 15 days, you could appeal and say, look, I don't think my dog's dangerous. I don't think that's right. This declaration is out of line. I have evidence to suggest that I have a defense and this animal should not be declared dangerous. They can do that. They just have to do it within 15 days. So in the event that someone fails to comply, the 30 days have come and gone, and they haven't appealed it, and they haven't done the things. They don't have the insurance, they don't have the secure enclosure, they're not compliant with with local regulations, then they shall impound the dog with the shelter, or what most commonly happens is we notify the court. We have a failure to comply with dangerous dog, and we ask for a hearing, and the animal is seized and can be ordered destroyed through that process. And the owner can appeal that too. So even if the court hears it and says, yes, Morgan, you were right to declare this dog dangerous, we uphold that was the right declaration to assign to this animal, the owner may appeal it. They have 10 days after that to appeal it. So at that point, I'm still just holding the animal. So this is a bit out of order, in my opinion, but it states that to determine that a dog is dangerous, first animal control has to investigate. Well, of course we did, because I've already made all those, all that evidence that we've attached to prove that it was unprovoked, outside of its enclosure, all of those things. So if the sworn statements and all the evidence meet the definition of dangerous dog, then the animal control authority, which is me, determines that and notifies of the determination in writing. So I mentioned these things, but I just think the law is out of a little out of order with that. So it does require registration. So each year, if you choose to own such an animal, each year you have to renew your registration to own this animal. Most folks do not make it this far. Most folks go ahead and say, look, I'm just going to own or surrender the dog. I can't carry all of this. The biggest hindrance to owning a dangerous dog is carrying the liability insurance. It is very tough to find an insurance company willing to insure your dog that already has this declaration, already has a bite history. You're going to struggle to find that. And so most folks, when we've been through whatever kind of process, they say, I just can't. I'm going to own or surrender the dog, or I'm going to have it euthanized at my own vet. And so currently today in San Angelo, we have no dangerous dogs registered because folks have opted to just go ahead and no longer own that pet. But if they did, each year we would get proof of current liability insurance, we would inspect that enclosure, current rabies vaccine, everything else, spay, neuter, microchip, of course, that's evergreen, it stays true, and they have to pay a $100 fee to have that registration. So once a dog is declared dangerous, if it then has an attack, it already has that label of dangerous dog, and it goes on to make an attack and makes another unprovoked attack on a person outside of its enclosure, causing bodily injury, it escalates. And so that constitutes an offense under this state law, and the court at that point may order the dog destroyed and no longer allow you to even have the chance to own it anymore. Look, you went through all this process to own this pet and still couldn't keep it from biting people, so we're going to go ahead and order it destroyed. And so that requires another hearing, presentation of evidence, a court order, can still be appealed, all of that process. So in the meanwhile, I'm still just holding that animal and housing that animal until we determine that. Okay, the rest of this section is pretty not applicable to San Angelo Animal Services, so we won't spend a whole lot of time on it. It has a whole dangerous wild animal regulation, and so we don't have a zoo or a research facility or any other qualifying organization in city limits that handles these animals, and they specifically list out what they're referencing as wild animals, and it's lions, tigers, ocelots, coyotes, chimpanzees, any hybrid of those animals, and so those are already prohibited inside city limits as pets, of course, but additionally, there's no qualifying organization that's allowed to have those. So when there's a traveling exhibit, like when a circus comes and it has, I don't know, elephants or whatever, they're permitted through the development services process, and if there were an incident where like their tiger got out, then we would be looped in, but there's nothing that San Angelo Animal Services, don't laugh at me. There's nothing that San Angelo Animal Services is doing around this section of the code, and so I didn't want to waste y'all's time going through all of this detail. So that wraps up state health code. When we get into this Texas administrative code, this was created to establish rules for rabies control, and it has a lot of definitions. Most of the definitions, of course, I think are real common sense things. The one thing that we run into quite a bit is what currently vaccinated means, and it's defined in state law as a USDA licensed vaccine to a pet that is old enough, which the state defines as 16 weeks, and it happened more than 30 days ago, that the vaccine was given more than 30 days ago. So we do serve a clientele that may have their animal rabies vaccinated in Mexico, does not count. We cannot call that current vaccinated. They're still in violation of not having a current rabies vaccine. It has to be through a USDA licensed vaccine. They also go on to define what high-risk animals are. And so these animals are high risk for rabies, high risk for spreading rabies. So these animals are adapted to live longer with the rabies virus, which makes them more dangerous to be able to spread the rabies virus. And those 5 species are bats, coyotes, raccoons, skunks, and foxes. So that's why it's quite common in any, subdivision to see a number of raccoons and skunks. And so that's why we offer that trapping service for free for raccoons and skunks, because they are higher risk for rabies. But in general, if your pet's current on a vaccine, we feel fine about it. They also define what low risk, so only mammals, of course, are at risk of contracting rabies, but there are certain mammals that are actually low risk for rabies, and it includes possums, rodents, rabbits, and armadillos. And the only reason I even mention these is because they do have a different quarantine period if they were ever exposed and needed to come in for quarantine. Oh, good, it's right here. So the observation period for an animal that has bitten. And just as a reminder, state law only cares about people that are bitten. So if an animal bites another animal, none of this section really applies. It is simply for an animal that has bitten. So if it is a dog, cat, or ferret, that animal will be put in quarantine for an observation period of 10 days from the day of the bite. So maybe your dog bit you on Sunday, but you didn't call me till today. It'll be 10 days from the bite, not necessarily 10 days from the report that animal will be put into quarantine, so a full 240 hours. If it is any other animal that is not high risk, so if your rabbit bites you, nope, we'll get to that in a second, but if your horse bites you, if some other mammal, it would actually be 30 days observation under state law. Again, we've never exercised this section of the law. We never have reports for other mammal bites. So then in the event people opt to not have their animal in quarantine for observation and instead opt for euthanasia and testing, which we'll cover more in a minute, but the state went ahead and in this section identified what a suitable specimen for testing is. And so it's our team that does this. And so if it is a bat or rodent, we ship the entire remains of the animal. If it is any other animal, we ship simply the animal's head with the brain and brainstem intact. If it is a large animal, like a cow, we would contract with a veterinarian to obtain the brainstem and tissue to send just the brain, because shipping a cow head is really expensive and hard to do. Sorry, y'all. It's gross, but it's what it is. So the second bullet under that, the head with brain, that is the most common thing that our team is doing. Okay, so they go on to define some additional information about the control of rabies. So all of this falls under the zoonosis control branch of the Department of State Health Services. And so zoonosis is just a fancy word for any disease you can get from an animal. And so rabies is the most dangerous one, but you can get hantavirus, you can get the plague, you can get so many things, and we would just refer those to the state. So we do rabies control, we don't do any other zoonotic control. If there's an individual in San Angelo that may have contracted an illness from an animal, we're gonna refer them straight to the state, and they're gonna work closely with us. So we're in Region 910, and so we work with staff based out of El Paso. And so we ship the specimen to the state lab in Austin, but they get all the data. And so they are watching that rabies activity. If they ever do any baiting, like if they put rabies vaccines out in bait for coyotes in the valley to no longer carry rabies, the state is doing all of that. We don't go in the fancy helicopter and do all of those things. We're reporting that information to the state, and if anything escalates, we call the state and we say, hey, there's something weird going on here. Administrative code does suggest that individuals who are at higher risk of exposure should receive the pre-exposure rabies vaccine. We previously did this for our staff, but we really were still having such low exposure rates that with supply chain issues and tough ability to obtain the vaccine, as well as the high cost of the vaccine, it was $800 at the time. I'm sure it's well over $1,000 now. We no longer offer this, but we do require everyone to wear appropriate PPE for such an event. The administrative code also states that any person with knowledge of an animal bite with probable cause of rabies shall report it and submit the animal for quarantine or testing. So if you show up at like urgent care and your dog bit you, they're gonna call us. We're gonna need to come out and do a report. But this section about probable cause of rabies exposure, that is so tough to know. The early signs of rabies are not what you see in movies, right? And so it is really, really, really uncommon that someone would know that they have a probable cause of rabies exposure, but this does just make really anybody a mandated reporter. And so just when in doubt, report a bite. If a bite broke skin, just call us and we'll walk you through next steps. That's how we're fighting anything spreading to people.
Megan, before
Yes.
I've got to be at another meeting in 15 minutes, so is this going to cause us to lose the quorum if I leave right now?
I have to have 4, so we'll be good.
Okay, well, I just didn't want to walk out like they did on the last meeting, so.
No, thank
All right,
you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, Judge.
And I also apologize, I've got to be in surgery.
No, I completely understand.
Yeah. You're still okay?
Yeah,
if I
'cause
go?
we've got-
Oh, okay, thank you.
Thank y'all. Anybody else? We talked a lot about this in our last presentation. This is, I think, redundant to the previous discussion about requirements for animal shelters, so I'll breeze over this. But it just states that the shelter must be structurally sound and maintained in good repair, that the manager of such a facility should be a veterinarian or somebody who's completed a training course, which I have, and that records should be maintained, food, cleaning, daily, all of that. We spent a lot of time on that last meeting, so we can move on, I think. So I mentioned before that dogs, cats, and ferrets have to be quarantined for 10 days from the bite, regardless of their vaccination status. So that's a quite on a common complaint that we get. Well, my dog's current on a rabies vaccine. Why does it have to be quarantined? Because state law says so. Sometimes it's that easy. State law also allows, and local ordinance reinforces this, that you can quarantine your animal at the shelter, at your vet clinic, or at home. And so the home quarantine has a lot of rules to it, and it is a commitment. And so if somebody is eligible for a home quarantine, we have a whole SOP built out about how they become eligible, and how they're offered that, and what they have to do. For example, they have to keep the animal isolated from any people or other animals. They have to have it behind 2 locks. They have to allow us to have routine observations of that animal. State law says we have to see it on the first and last day. We see it a whole lot more than that. So that is, it is a job, and in the event that they're not complying with the home quarantine, we revoke it and it has to come into the shelter or a vet clinic to finish the rest of its quarantine. And they get a ticket for failure to quarantine at that time. And I mentioned this briefly earlier, that the owner, they're calling it custodian, but the owner may also euthanize the animal and submit it for testing. And it goes on to say that unowned animals may be euthanized and tested instead of the 10-day quarantine. And so, of course, we have our local ordinance that says that I have to keep dogs 3 days after their day of arrival to see if they're owned. But if it bit somebody, the public safety outweighs that. And so ideally, we're still honoring the 3 days. Ideally, we're still trying to find out who the owner is. But if the dog has no tag, no ID, no microchip, nothing on any local lost and found sites, and it bit a person, we're probably going to go ahead and document all of that and euthanize the animal and submit it for testing. That's more important than maybe there's an owner out there somewhere, somehow, in such a circumstance. It also states that any free roaming high-risk animals shall be euthanized and tested. And we learned this the hard way. We had some young children who had interacted with some fox cubs who were beautiful and healthy and amazing, and they were puppies and they were playful and they nipped at these young children, and we had to test those animals. There was no opportunity for rehab because they're one of those species that's defined as high risk. So we just encourage folks to not approach animals you don't know. So, and then low-risk animals, so those ones I identified earlier, armadillos, rabbits, possums, do not require any quarantine or testing. The risk of them carrying rabies is so low that they don't even have to be tested. Some folks insist on that, and they'll say, "This squirrel bit me, and it must be tested." I mean, we'll do that to keep the bite victim satisfied and confident in their health, but state law doesn't require it. I really think we've talked about all of this. We've adopted SOPs, staff uses PPE. and Department of State Health Services will inspect at least annually, and that's that zoonotic group out of El Paso. They come annually, and they just came early March and did our inspection, and we passed with flying colors, of course. So good news there. So we talked before about, vaccination requirements, and we're surprised by the number of people that still don't know. There is some nuance in the law, which is that you shall vaccinate your dog, cat, or ferret by 16 weeks of age by a veterinarian. This is not a vaccine that you can buy at Tractor Supply and do yourself. And then we just, at that point, defer to a veterinarian about what subsequent vaccinations will be scheduled. Is the pet eligible for a 1-year vaccine, a 3-year vaccine? When are their boosters recommended? At that point, the veterinarians must provide a vaccination certificate, and we simply defer to that. If the vaccination certificate states that they're current, they're current. So, disposition of domestic animals exposed to rabies. So I added this first bullet because I did not think it was clear in state law. So this would be if your dog got a hold of a skunk, right? And so then I tested that skunk and it tested positive. If your pet is not currently vaccinated, you can euthanize it, or you can vaccinate it for rabies and isolate it for 90 days. This is very different from quarantine and observation. When your pet is in quarantine, you cannot vaccinate that animal. In the event it has somehow contracted the rabies virus, the vaccine can cause an faster onset of that disease and can create false symptoms in our observation of the animal. So if your animal's under quarantine, and this is how this normally plays out, right? You call me and you're like, hey, a skunk wandered in my dog door and my dog killed it. And I'm like, okay, we're gonna go ahead and order a quarantine for your dog. We're gonna test the skunk, right? I call you in a couple days and I'm like, okay, so that skunk was positive. At that point, the dog leaves quarantine at our facility, is vaccinated by its vet, and enters isolation at its home. So if it wasn't currently vaccinated, that'll be 90 days at home where the owner has to keep it isolated from other animals, has to handle it minimally, wear gloves when they're feeding it, watering it, taking it out for bathroom breaks. If your pet was current on a rabies vaccine, you can euthanize it or vaccinate and isolate for 45 days. So you get a much easier time if your pet was current on a vaccine. And we have had this exact scenario happen multiple times in my tenure, and every time I see the animals pull through, no problem. So the vaccines work. Please get your pets vaccinated. It can absolutely save their life. We don't do much. This is not anything about what we do with transfer of pets. This is people bringing in pets into Texas from other states or from other countries, and we don't police much of this. The DSHS would loop us in if we need to do anything, but it has never happened. When we're shipping a specimen, whether it be the whole body, just the head, or just the brain, we have to, when we prepare it for shipment, it must be refrigerated, never frozen. It must meet federal shipping requirements. We have to ship it in such a way that it prevents leakage, and it has to have labeling on it and a federal form with it. And so all of that goes out. USPS, the federal, the government does not ship such specimens. When I started, we were sending these to Austin by bus ticket, and when we lost the bus service in town, we ship them now via FedEx. So that is an approved vendor that accepts them. I think it's the only shipping vendor that currently accepts such specimens. If we have something really, really sensitive, like a high-risk animal bit somebody near their brainstem, we would drive it to Austin to get it there faster. We would call our state folks in El Paso and say, this is what we're looking at. We think it needs to be in Austin like right now, and they would advise. The Health and Human Services Commission can declare a statewide quarantine, and that mostly just means you can't take animals in or out of the state. We've never seen that. That's very rare. So that wraps up Chapter 169 of the Administrative Code, and we've talked about local ordinances quite a bit. I think a lot of it is just redundant and reinforcing what we talked about in state law. So to respect y'all's time, I don't think we need to spend a lot of time for this. But one thing that's important that I brought up when I was new that folks do regularly bring up is there's a section of the ordinance that says and defines what the duties of an animal services director are, and we really haven't had that job description since 2007. We did like a class and compensation study, and that's not the job title we had anymore. And so prior cities, legal staff advised that it's a description of a person's daily duty, not necessarily their job title with the city. So that is me, even though my job title isn't animal services director. And it also names me as the local rabies control authority. The language in the ordinance actually says the animal services director is a local rabies control authority. So for my peace of mind, we actually took a resolution to the council to name me specifically since it wasn't clear. I didn't think it was clear enough. It talks about vaccination. So we talked about the vaccination at the state level. The only thing that's different in city ordinance is it adds pot-bellied pigs, that they also have to be vaccinated against rabies. There's a section in the ordinance about diseased animal, and so this could be any zoonotic, like a disease that could spread to people, or just any disease. So owners shall not keep animals infected with diseases which may spread to other animals unless they're seeking medical care and isolating their sick animals, right? So if your dog has kennel cough, keep it in another room from your other dogs. This section of the ordinance does add that not only if a person is bitten by a dog, cat, or other animal, but also if any animal to animal bites happen. So if my dog attacks your cat and it's a bite and it breaks the skin, both my suspect animal and your victim animal both have to be quarantined. Certainly, if your animal is medically fragile as a result of the attack, we want to offer a home quarantine if at all possible. And it's the same 10 days from the bite, can be at the shelter, clinic, or home. One thing that we had considered in the past is some legislation, and we've got a lot of things that we're researching right now, so I don't know if this is the most important thing, but dogs and cats aren't high risk for rabies. So we had looked at maybe carving out this section of the ordinance would just be if your pet bites or was bitten by a species that's high risk for rabies. So if my cat is attacked by a raccoon, I'm a lot more concerned than if my cat's attacked by a dog as far as rabies control. Same with livestock. We work a lot of bite cases where somebody's dogs has bitten a sheep or bitten goats, and the risk of rabies spread is not zero, but it's not high. And so is that the best use of our time? It's still a concern that the dogs were out of their enclosure. It's still a concern that there was damage to property. But is it a rabies quarantine? I would feel safe about excluding that part of it. So maybe a future discussion, but just know that this is that section that I'm referencing when we talk about that. It's a large workload for us. The majority of bite cases we work are animal to animal. So this provides for a violation if somebody fails to quarantine their animal. We issue that notice of quarantine. Ideally, we're handing it to the owner. But we also can just post it at the subject property. At that point, they have 24 hours to comply, that they would put the animal into quarantine. If it's in a home quarantine, that has to be approved by us. We have to walk you through the SOP.
Excuse me. I'm sorry to interrupt you, but if we may have a short break, maybe 10 minutes break and come back?
Yeah, we could also,
Okay.
yeah.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
We could also adjourn. We're wrapping up. Yeah, I'm literally done. Down, yeah. I think we could call the meeting, quite frankly, for over due to lack of quorum because I literally had one slide. And the follow-up and administrative, I think we have clarity on how to proceed.
Yeah, the only,
You want us to wait the 10 minutes? Okay.
yeah, wait till Jen, when Let's reconvene. Morgan, do you have anything else with item C?
The only other thing is state law does require that once your animal's coming out of quarantine, that if it is not currently vaccinated, it must be vaccinated at that time. And so we notify owners of that and we either cite them, ideally, in this climate, we're citing people for failure to spay neuter over anything else, but we're notifying them of the requirement to vaccinate their pet. We give them a deadline to do so and follow up for failure and a citation if needed. So that's it on item C.
Okay, well, that concludes all regular agenda items. I do have a follow-up to mention to carry forward to the next meeting, and that would be the continued discussion and legal interpretation for the definition of a nuisance animal. And with that, does anyone else have administrative issues or follow-up?
I am curious about somebody being able to inform us, maybe somebody can come and talk to us about enforceable tickets for spay neuter, the more information on how those can be enforced, so it's not just somebody spending their time if they are writing a ticket versus a citation. I'm interested in having somebody come visit with us, whether they can call me and tell me what the difference is.
Well, a ticket
Or-
is a citation, so we cite every person we interact with, they get a citation for failure to spay neuter.
I thought there was a difference between a ticket and a citation.
Not in my experience. We are issuing a citation. It is a promise to appear before the court. We don't issue tickets, we issue citations.
So enforceable to warrant if unremedied?
I'm sorry?
Are they enforceable to warrant if they're not remedied or paid?
When we
That's-
issue the
that's-
citation, they must appear before the court, and at that point, they can plead guilty, guilty, not guilty, or no contest. And that's the enforcement. It doesn't get the animal spay neutered, which I think is what we all want, but a court process is not ever going to do that. It's not going to get their pet spay neutered.
Okay, something else.
They just get another citation if still non-compliant.
Maybe pending on our subcommittee, but at some point I'd like for somebody to come and present the cost effectiveness of spay neuter in depth and possibly present that to the city. And then the other, true public I want to just have something, more discussion on true public education on the law, the spay neuter chip, and vaccination. I don't know if that needs to be an agenda or to have somebody come speak to us about that. I don't know the procedures.
Okay.
And did we talk about our meeting, our frequency? Or decide?
Yeah, I think we've got clear direction that the chairperson's going to call a meeting in April. Is that
Yes.
what would you, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, what particular, are there any particular dates that anyone would recommend?
The third Thursday is still blocked out for staff, and we would likely be able to get the room.
Third Thursday? The third Thursday of April?
Thursdays are fine with me.
It is? Okay, well, then I would entertain a motion that we schedule a meeting for the third Thursday of April.
I'll second that motion.
All in favor?
Yay.
Aye.
Aye.
Got it.
Well, that's aye, because there's only 4 of us.
You've
Are
got
you in
3
favor?
ayes, it passes, yeah. you're
Oh,
good.
okay.
It would still pass. It
Yeah.
would be a majority
Okay,
vote.
good.
It's one of those times where I'm staff, I do what I'm told. So
So,
we talk about, walking that line of a committee member and the staff liaison. This is that time that I'm like, yes, sir.
so we have a meeting scheduled for the third Thursday of April, and I'm looking for a motion to adjourn.
Motion to adjourn.
I'll second that motion.
All in favor? Say aye. We are adjourned. Thank you, folks.